Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Reinventing Church. My name is Danielle Hartland. I'm here with Derek Sanford, as always. And today in this episode, we're going to talk about why those kids like their worship music so loud, how to know when it's time to move on, and the importance of piloting new things.
Yeah.
So be good. This will be a good one. Hi. So I heard you're going to be a grandpa.
Yeah.
Congrats.
We're not going to start with the conspiracy theories we were just talking about?
Sure.
No.
No. We'll save that for episode 8.
We need to get him in first.
Yeah, we need to get him to come in. I'm sure we can get him.
I am going to be a grandpa.
Yeah. You're so old.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's okay.
It took me a minute to get my brain around it.
Yeah.
It's hard.
When is she due?
She's due November.
Oh, that's
so,
soon.
This is
It'll be a holiday
Our
baby.
son and our daughter-in-law are having a little girl.
That's awesome.
They've already picked a name.
What's the name?
Ruby.
That's cute.
Ruby Jude.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's like old and new at the same time.
Right, exactly.
That's awesome. Oh, cool. Names are important.
Yeah. I was kind of encouraging them to wait till they lay eyes on this thing to name it, but they're full steam ahead.
That's what happened with Dax.
Ruby Jude.
We had
Really?
we had a different name, and I was like, nope, no, he does not look at that name at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the names we had chosen for Aiden, who we obviously eventually called Aiden, was the name meant crooked nose. And she came out of the womb with a crooked nose, and we were like, "No, we can't do that to them."
No, that would be bad.
So we went with Aiden.
Okay, speaking of names, one of my weird, I don't understand it culturally. So sorry if you're in this camp. What are you going to have your grandchild call you?
Oh, listen, this is a big topic.
Meep, meep, boop, boop.
Well, that's
Really?
the thing. So my wife has very strong feelings about those kind of things.
Yeah.
She's like, I will not be called something that's not a word. So don't
thank you.
do me boopa or boppy or whatever. Noni or whatever. Yeah. But she's like, I will be grandmother. Before I'm any of those things. So, but you know, the split advice that we're getting is like, the early advice I got was, don't even think about it. They're just going to call you what they call you.
Yeah.
And then I was at a dinner recently, a cerviary dinner. My friend Lisa was like, oh, no. She's like, you must decide, because she says you're going to start calling yourself things to that baby before they, like, you will.
Oh, true.
So when you're down in their face and you're going to be like,
oh, true.
Papa loves you, or, but like, she's like, you have to decide right then who you are. You're not going to say Derek loves you, you know, you got to call yourself something.
Yeah, you could.
So
Derek
she's like,
loves you.
So she's like, you have to decide up front, and then you fill that child's brain with whatever it is you're going to be called.
Well, okay, yeah, that's a way.
Yeah. So when we were talking about it, my grandpa, we always had to call him Jack.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Literally his first name, because there was ladies he was still trying to impress, apparently.
Oh my
And he didn't want anybody to know he was that old.
Okay.
And here's the thing, not for the same reasons, but I get it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to admit that you're at that stage of life. It's a very strange thing when it's the first time.
Sure.
And so our son and daughter asked, you know, so does that mean you're going to be called Derek? And I said, no, I think I'm going with Jack.
I was expecting that. Okay. Jack. That's
it's
funny.
like our family grandpa name.
Yeah,
So
Jack.
like Jack.
And that's
so
the thing.
grandmother and Jack.
Oh my gosh. Are we going to grandmother and Jack's house? She'll never talk to Kim because she won't be able to say her name. But Jack will come right away. That'll be,
exactly.
That's hilarious. Good. Okay.
There we go.
There you go. Thanks. Okay. So let's move artfully into your inbox.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So this, again, just a reminder, we're just doing this because you've spent so much time responding to both sensible and crazy emails and everything in between.
For 30 years.
For 30 years. So you got a library. So we're trying to go through the most helpful ones.
Yep.
So here's one, or the most common, common or whatever. But, okay. Why is the volume of the worship music so loud? It seems to me that the worship team is just trying to show off and be performancy. It hurts my ears, and coming to church is ruining my hearing.
Right.
I mean, I've worked in church in 20 years. I don't give a, that's fine. Plus, it's much more spiritual if we can hear all the voices singing without the instruments drowning them out. And we just recently heard from somebody else, just to add on, it was church feedback loop, and they said the person wrote a thing that was they were so discouraged because the devil had his fingers on the volume button. I'm like, listen,
it's got to be
that's amazing. That's actually a really good turn. So, okay, this is I think this is a common one. People probably all over the place get number one, and you'll get into this, but number one, because sometimes you're just building the system and trying to figure out what works in the room you're in.
Right.
So there is a legitimate concern sometimes.
Sure.
When you're tweaking. I've been part of it. I've walked rooms with decibel meters and, so I get it. Like this, I think this will be really helpful. So what's your thoughts?
And really, sometimes the room is bad.
Yeah,
sometimes
it's just,
the mix is bad.
Yep.
Sometimes, like, there's other factors sometimes other than just volume.
Totally.
Sometimes you sit in a different place in the room and
that's the worst
better
one.
Than other, right?
That's the worst one.
So, like, you literally have to tell. It sounds like you're a nut job, but you tell somebody, like, if you sit over here, it's actually going to be better. Yeah. So, part of it is just kind of knowing that stuff. But as I've responded to many of these over the years, and we don't really get this one too much anymore, but it was a lot at some point, and I know a lot of other church leaders deal with this one. The first thing that I always try to do in responding is to empathize with their feelings, acknowledge that this is one of those issues that has many opinions, and it's probably impossible to make everyone happy because partially it is a matter of preference. Yeah. And I think helping people to understand that is really important. And so there's a few, and as we're doing these, like I'm not reading my exact responses to these things, but I want to give some categories that hopefully will help church leaders to kind of think about how to respond. So one of them is, I think you want to address the safety thing because that tends to be, whether it's valid or not, that tends to be something that people throw in and just like, hey, I went to my hearing doctor and he told me, and it's got to be because of church.
Yeah, it's not the lawnmower.
So I think addressing the safety concerns, I would encourage everybody to, and you mentioned this, but to have some sort of a calibrated decibel meter that you either have or borrow from time to time just to check the room because it mainly because it gives you data.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And you're able then to talk about it somewhat intelligently. So like OSHA levels. So basically, and I have this literally because we've had to look it up over the years.
Yeah.
So OSHA, which is the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, says the average person can experience hearing loss when subjected to continuous 85 decibels for 8 hours in a row. So that's basically standing next to an idling bulldozer or your kitchen blender for 8 hours straight. That's when you're
on that level
for 8 hours straight. Yeah. Now, 85 to 90 tends to be around where we run our sound. And so, obviously, according to OSHA, unless you're in a worship service for 8 hours straight of constant music, it's probably not doing damage to your ears. But and our music portions usually last between 15 and 25 minutes,
and
maybe.
even a worship night would be less than 2 hours.
Right, less than 2 hours. So, but all that being said, we recognize that some people are more sensitive than others to those kinds of things. And so, we've even done some earplugs from time to time. We don't really run it that loud, but obviously we're responding to this safety issue and just saying we want to do anything that we can do to help it not be uncomfortable for you. And really just this alone, a lot of times it puts people at ease just to know that we're aware of this kind of data.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Just to go, hey, we're familiar with dB levels. We know what dangerous dB levels are. We're not there. And so just that alone can often put people at ease. The second part of it, though, that gets a little bit more personal is that there is a personal preference side of this. And it's not just a volume preference. It's actually a music style preference that plays into this as well. And like I said before, sometimes it's a mix issue, but because really nobody likes to, if people don't like the style of music, it's going to feel too loud.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
And if you don't like music, a little bit too loud seems like a lot of bit too loud. You know what I'm saying? So, because
that's a good point.
People don't just want to hear loudly music they don't like.
Yes.
So, but here's the other thing that I find interesting, and this. So I'm a musical guy. I've always been. You are a musical girl. You've always been. My wife is not a musical girl,
right?
At all.
Yeah.
Admittedly, so I'm not like throwing her under the bus. So often I find with this preference thing, often musical people want the volume. It depends, but some want the volume to be lower so they can hear themselves sing or hear other people sing. My wife wants to sing loud and does not want to hear herself sing or anyone to hear her sing.
Totally.
And so she would rather have it loud, drowning her out so that she can participate.
Yeah.
It's not
That's a good
don't
point.
want to participate. It's I do want to participate. I just don't want anybody to hear what's coming out of my mouth.
Sometimes I think the most exposing, like for people like that, the most exposing is when we're like, drop the music, everyone sing out.
Right. And then they just
and we should do that. That's fun,
Sure.
but it's uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable.
And the point just is there's preference to this. It's a personal preference thing. It's not a right or wrong thing. And so, and I always want to reinforce to people when they're writing about this, our desires for participation and not performance, obviously. And sometimes louder music, like we just said, actually encourages participation. It doesn't discourage it. And so, the illustration I always use is if you're driving down the road and your favorite song comes on kind of thing, and you want to sing along, do you turn the volume up or do you turn it down?
That's great, yeah.
And you usually turn it up so that you can belt. And so turning it up doesn't necessarily mean participation goes down.
Yeah, it's good.
That is not our human experience. I also always want to just go to bat for our musicians and people on the stage of just saying, listen, I know their hearts and whatever you're perceiving them to be, if you're perceiving them to be show-offy or whatever, I promise you they are not. Their hearts are for Jesus, and nobody's up there for accolades or anything like that. The last thing that I would just say is there are some biblical and practical matters that you can kind of bring in. So again, to start with safety, talk about personal preference a little bit, there's some biblical and practical matters. So one is just the nature of music. Celebrative music tends to be louder and more raucous, and we have a lot to celebrate. Yeah. And so when people come on Sunday, hopefully our gathering is going to more feel like a wedding than a funeral.
Yeah, exactly.
And a celebration. And so that's naturally going to be a little bit louder. And again, we do celebrative songs loud. Sometimes we do reflective songs soft. Both are encouraging full participation. Yeah. The other thing that I always found funny is that whenever the Bible talks about volume, it talks about loud.
Weird.
So it's not like this is a biblical, that we're violating biblical principles or something like that. This is a little bit tongue in cheek, but if I have a good relationship with the person, I'll often throw this in. Like when the Bible commands us to worship, it commands loud. It talks about shouting. It talks about crashing cymbals. It talks about, playing loudly with the musical instruments and that sort of thing. So anyway, I put some biblical references in the show notes if anyone cares to look. But and then the last thing I would just say is whenever we get this response, I always try to just say, if you have a concern about the volume, here's what to do with that. And because we do not want people making a beeline to the soundboard during worship services.
Oh my gosh, no.
To level their complaints against the tech person. And so I'll just kind of spell out, here's who to talk, if you have further concerns, here's who to talk to. Please do not bother the tech person during the service. They have enough to think about. They're trying to, do a whole bunch of things at once, and that it doesn't help. To go back and say turn it down during worship. So anyway, those are some categories I think to help people respond to these kids and their music complaints.
Great, that's awesome. All right, so we're going to move into our Reinventing Church topic, and we're going to invite Stephen Hay to join us again. He was with us last week if you listened. So we're going to bring him in and continue on with Stephen. Stephen, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Hi, Stephen.
Yeah.
You did so good last time. Wow. We'll have you back again.
Just not next week.
Correct. We'll see. Okay, but we're continuing this conversation just about transition and how to know when you're ready for reinventing something, changing something.
Yeah.
And so this week we want to talk about specifically, the question is, how do you know if God has released you to move on to something more, something different, or So let's start with you. Why do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, at the beginning stages of this podcast, I'm really just thinking about, like, before we get into the nuts and bolts of actual stuff we're changing at Grace, and I wanted to give a little bit of backstory of, like, how did we get to this point, and what would make me, who's been here for 30 years, and a church that's been around for 130 years, undergo a major change like this. And so I want to give a little bit of that backstory of, like, how do you get there? And so this is really what started the whole process of reinventing church for us. My first reaction when we started talking about new direction was, like, that'll be a good thing for the next guy to do.
Right.
And I'm just going to ride out what I know. And so, obviously God didn't release me to that. He prompted me to stay and be a part of making those changes. And so that's kind of my story of just, like, leaning into God and God going, no, I want you to do this with your last run. Stephen, coming from his church, God did release him to kind of leave and hand off. Yeah. And so, I think these are two different perspectives on the same topic. And so that's why I want to talk about it, because I think, a lot of church leaders out there are going, oh, here we are, we're at this major kind of crossroads or intersection, or I'm feeling prompted to do this. And it's like, well, how do you know whether you should do that and take the church through a major renovation, or whether you should kind of hand it off and let the next person do it?
That's great. So let's start. There's some levels to this, obviously, but let's start with the personal side. So let's talk a little bit about the process. What kind of questions you're asking yourself? What'd you go through? Either one of you, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, well, I'll start, and then we'll kind of hand off a major section to Stephen here. But I know for me, some of the personal questions, and it's interesting because as church leaders, I think we're good at telling people how to hear from God, and sometimes we don't.
That's funny.
Take the time to hear from God ourselves.
Oh, I got to do this myself?
Yeah, I better do this myself. And so, I think just some, like, triggering questions are things like, is my soul healthy enough to hear from God right now?
That's good.
And I better get that straight before I'm making any major decisions for my church. What channels of communication do I use to help discern God's voice? And so I've taught this, I've preached this, I've helped people do this, and there's a sense of which, like, every church leader needs to understand, how do I best hear from God? And again, we talk about studying your Bible and praying and the major things, but I do also believe that every individual kind of has a pathway to God that's most natural to them. And so I think some people hear from God most in nature, for example, or some people hear from God. No, me neither. Some people hear from God more intellectually. Some people hear from God more relationally. They have to be in conversation with other people. Some people hear from God most when they're in a worship, worship music blaring in a setting like that. Some people are activistic. And they hear from God most when they're, there's sweat pouring down their brow and their tongue's hanging out and they're serving with all their might. And God uses those moments to speak to them. So I think really just understanding, like, what is your pathway to best hear from God? Yeah. And especially leading up to a moment where you're making a decision like this, like, immerse yourself in that pathway so that you can hear from God. I think then there are just really kind of self-reflecting questions of, does the congregation trust me enough to walk us through this change? Do I possess the skills needed to lead us through this change? Right. Those kind of questions. So I think there's just a lot of, like, soul searching and God invitation into the process that, before you're making a major change to the right or the left, you need to ask some of these kinds of questions.
That's great. What do you want to add?
Yeah, so for me, I love all of that. I think those are great. I give a little bit of I shared a little bit of the Wilson story about moving into health in 2018 and it feeling very tangible, and it did. And at the time, honestly,
explain Wilson for those who are just picking up with this episode. Yeah. A smaller church.
So small country church, about 25, 35 people originally. We grew to about probably 140, 120. We did have a church unofficially plant out of us, and we partnered with it loosely, but we didn't have the infrastructure to sort of really help with that or anything like that. But so we went from probably about 140 down to 120-ish after that. But anyway, in about 2018, we went we moved into a tangible season of health, and we were really pursuing church health since 2010. And not to get into the nitty gritty, we just don't have time for it today. You can listen to the other podcast. But there was just different seasons that we would walk through, and some things that we had to address along the way. And it was just beautiful when we moved into that season of health. But it was tangible, and it almost felt like I liken it to, churches that go through vision cycles, which you guys are pretty familiar with at Grace. Once a vision cycle is done, I mean, we would never have called it that.
Yeah.
But once the vision cycle was done, we're like, okay, what's next? And there's usually like that, yearish, maybe 18 months of like discerning, getting the team together. And so that's where my brain went initially. And then after about 18 months, started to panic because it was just something different about myself. There wasn't a sense of vision for that place anymore. There wasn't, I would now say it, I wouldn't probably be able to put that into that language, but there wasn't a calling there anymore. But I would have discerned it at the time of it felt different. I didn't have the same type of passion and vision for that place. And so I began to panic. Like, what is going on here, And so that began this journey of sort of, okay, what do I do now? What is that God actually, is he calling me? Because we didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
And we were riding out. I mean, this was the best 18 months we probably ever had. It was beautiful. Community was rich and deep, and everybody loved each other. I mean, the local missional effort was beautiful. I mean, we were established in the community for all intents and purposes. I mean, no church is perfect, but it was great.
Good, yeah.
It was a beautiful thing. And so, I began to panic. So anyway, that's the context. So as I've now reflected, 4 years post that, leaving Wilson, there was definitely some important moments in discerning a call. What is God doing in this moment? And I would always advise any pastor, small church pastor, any pastor, and you kind of hinted on this. You could push back if you don't necessarily agree with this, but I would always encourage a pastor to do it in between seasons.
That's good.
I just don't.
That's a great way to say it.
I would even say biblically, I just don't see a great argument for, hey, I'm in the middle of what we believe God was charging us to, and now I'm going to bail.
Yeah.
I think there's probably more under the surface there, that either there's a hard situation, a couple of situations that you're afraid to address, or you're running up against something that is difficult that you don't feel like you have the energy for. But I don't necessarily believe that God would be discerning you from something that he called you to lead in the middle of. So my word has always been, listen, just make sure you're doing it in between seasons.
That's good. So how would you define a season? So are you thinking of like a season in the life of a church that has kind of like a vision cycle, like we said, like that has a bit of a beginning and a seeming end, and we're kind of in the middle? Are you thinking about a season personally? You're moving from one season of life into another. Like what when you say it should be in between seasons, just give a little bit more specificity.
I think that's great. I'm thinking specifically within the life of the church.
Yeah.
It could be personal. I don't know if I would be as hard and fast on that rule. But with your leadership team, with your eldership, whatever your church structure is, if you guys have essentially put your hands in the middle on something, and you're chasing, whether it's 10 years, whether it's 5 years, whether it's 2 years, whether it's a year, or even whether it's something significant that you didn't even put a time frame on, but it's like, hey, we're pretty passionate about this, and we're going to chase it down until we've realized it and we feel satisfied in that reality. I don't think you're bailing on that.
Yeah, that's good. So it's almost like a finish what you started thing. Get to that finish line, 100%. And then you can think about. And I'm thinking about the people who are listening that are maybe like, well, it'd be nice to have had a choice, but I was pushed out in the middle of a season, or my elders they gave up on this, I didn't, and I would almost echo kind of that same sentiment of go, man, I would really push hard to have them let you finish.
Yeah. As much as it depends on you,
right? To really kind of dig your heels and say, no. Once we get through this, then you guys do what you need to do. But I really want us to see this through. And I think, it may be that there are times where people have kind of given up too easily in the middle of something because they felt that pressure to go. And I would just almost reinforce what you're saying, but even if you're not the one calling all the shots, to really press to get to the end of this thing, and then let's make our big decision.
100%. Yeah. I think that's really, really good. There was a moment where I had actually written my resignation. Mm-hmm. It was actually in my jacket pocket the Sunday that I preached. But my wife actually walked me back from the edge. Mm. And it was that night. I put it in there the night before, so I wasn't necessarily anticipating saying it on Sunday. But I called. Nicole was out, and I called her, and I'm like, "Hey, you need to come home. This is what I'm thinking." And it was right in the middle of this season, and I mean, we maybe had a 2.5 hour conversation, and she just said, "Stephen, you're not done." Mm-hmm. And if anybody knows my wife, she's, she's Italian, so she'll tell you what she feels. But it was a really good conversation, and it was probably about 3-4 years later, I actually found that resignation.
Whoa.
But we're in a season of health.
Oh, wow.
And I remember reading it. I was in tears.
Yeah, of course.
Just thankful that I didn't bail on that difficult season.
It's great. It's a great word.
Yeah, so it may feel difficult at the time, but man, it's beautiful on the back end. Yeah. It really is.
I'm surprised Nicole didn't reach right in there and pull that thing out of your pocket herself.
Set it on fire.
Gave you a very
boundaries
a handsy hug.
A handsy hug.
Yeah, a little
slip it in.
A little pickpocket. I don't know if she's got that in her repertoire.
I wouldn't put anything past her.
I wouldn't either. So anyway, I don't know if you want me to keep moving.
Let's talk a little bit. Self-reflection. What are your tips there?
Yeah. So that's good. So after realizing, okay, I got to do some work. Yeah. For me, it was important that this process. So if God is calling me from this place, that's the thought in the back of my head. What do I need to do? What infrastructure do I need to set up to support that idea? I'm not saying it is. And so I think really with anything in life, it has to start with personal assessment, right? I think you could go to scripture and, take the plank out of your own eye before you take the speck out your brother's. And so what is the work that you have to do? And you kind of touched on some of those, and I think, those are really great as well. For me, it was evaluating it from hopefully a place of health. I had assumed I was in a place of health. And so just really looking objectively at what are my strengths? Yeah. Literally writing them down, involving a third party or a couple of confidants, specifically lead pastors. It could be a touchy area. Yeah. You just don't invite anybody into that space. But what are your strengths? Literally write them down, as many as you can think. Celebrate those while you do it as well. God's given you those strengths. I think it's really empowering in that moment to realize how God. So for me, it was I'm entrepreneurial. There's always new ideas. If you're familiar with Lencioni, right? I love creating new ideas and discerning those. So what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And be really honest. I mean, for me, I had 10 years of ministry at that point. I got some weaknesses, right? You have built the church that you have built really to support your weaknesses. Yeah. And so what are those? Write them down, call them out. That's good. And then on top of that, what are your blind spots? And so you may have a list of weaknesses, but as you involve those people in the process, you're asking them, okay, here's my list, both strengths and weaknesses, affirm, confirm, deny, whatever. Let's talk about them. What's not on the list?
That's good.
What are blind spots, both positively and negatively? And there's a phenomenal tool. I mean, we use it here at Grace called the Johari window.
Yeah, let's walk through that.
And it's a wonderful tool. So if anybody's looking, go Google search it and you'll find 1,000 images. But it's a wonderful tool, very easy to walk through, but have that circle walk through that with you and have them be really honest with you. And that I just found that was just so helpful.
Yeah. That's good. That blind spot thing is I just love putting one more level of words to it. It's that there's parts of you that others know about you that you don't know about yourself. And so, I mean, that's the definition of a blind area. Yep. But I think just saying that out loud of going, no, there's people around you that know this thing about you that you're completely oblivious to.
And everyone has it.
And everybody has those things. And unless you ask people to speak into that, they're probably not going to tell you.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will on the positive side, because there's positive things others know about you that you don't know about yourself too, that can come in the form of encouragement. But there are some negative things too that, once you walk out of the room, the three people left are rolling their eyes going, he did it again.
Yeah.
You don't even know you did it.
You don't even know.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
And unless you ask them, you'll never know.
Yeah.
So.
And some of those conversations, like in my life anyway, there are sentences that have been said to me, not to hurt me, but to, reveal something like that. They're in my brain. It doesn't mean you automatically get better at them or like whatever, but it helps being aware of something.
Yeah. It's
awesome.
Developmental.
Yeah, it totally is.
It helps you to develop.
Yeah.
The question I love that somebody I should give credit to, but I don't know who, to ask what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's just really a great question.
Yeah.
Just like, please, I'm inviting you to please tell me some of those things. And I think that's a great assessment posture is to go, am I the one to lead this forward or not? Because that's really what we're talking about here.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great.
So we can, assessing ourselves. I mean, I could assess myself all day because that's just my personality because I never happy. But so the other part, obviously the other big part is the church. Yeah. So then turning your attention to the church, what did that look like for you? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's great. So, assessment of self is important, but assessment of the church too is very important. And so I would say at this point, I don't want to prescribe anything, but at this point, still have your confidence. But at some point, you're going to have to involve your leadership. And it doesn't need to be within the framework of, hey, I think God's moving me from here. But it's hey, we came through a really hard season. We're in a good season now. We're in between seasons, whatever it is for you. We really should sit down and do a little bit of work. And I think this is maybe a good first step. Yeah. And so covertly, you could, then have that list that you can use next to your personal assessment as well. Or if you're at a place, you can say, hey, here's kind of what's on my brain. I think it just really depends on, you discern that. But anyways.
I'll never forget, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, go for it.
One of the more powerful transitions we've had around here in my memory was kind of that. You could tell that our former lead pastor, Pastor Al, you could tell that he had come into a retreat setting. I guess retrospectively could tell that he had come in doing work. Like he had done personal work, entering into that time with us. And I'll never forget, like the whole transition was just like, he just drew this bus and was talking about like people being on the bus, people being off the bus, doing this whole exercise to end with him saying like, I'm not on the bus. And not in a like unhealthy way, in a way that's like, this is the bus we need to be driving right now. I'm not your driver for this.
Yeah, I'm not your driver.
And like, it was the part of the catalyst to like the healthiest transition.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And I think that personal work, church work, all that stuff just like led to that.
Yeah, and it was wild. It was that collision. I remember him saying to me, he said, for the first time in my ministry, I don't feel like I can see around the next corner.
Yeah,
that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah. Because it's a mix of vision and strategy and just self-awareness and where the church, it's all the things that you're saying.
I've always been able to see, but
I've kind of always known what's next, and I can't really discern what's next.
That's great verbiage.
Well, it's kind of your panic moment.
That was my realization. Yeah, my panic moment. Like I can't see around this corner. I've always been able to see.
Yeah.
And it's weird for me because I feel like I'm a vision guy. I love vision. Yeah. So then I just, I use the same list. Because I think, in any assessment, you want to be able to you compare your notes, if you will. So what are the church's strengths? Like, what are you really good at? you may be really embedded in your community. And for us, we were. Like, we were really the pastors, and my wife and I were really the pastors of the community. That's 2,500 people in this little community. Whenever something happened, we got the call. And so that was one of our church's strengths. We were just so embedded in this community. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. But also, what are your church's weaknesses? And be honest. Like, what do we not do well? I mean, there's always going to be things that we're not necessarily great at. Let's own those things. And then what are your church's blind spots, which you could probably do. I think you'd have to pull some other people in, but assuming that you're in a season of health, what are your church's needs? And I think this is twofold. Personally, I think it's currently, what are your current needs? And then what are your future needs? Like, as we look to the future, and you don't need a vision cycle for that. You just need to be honest. And I think that's a great time to pull your leadership in. What are our needs currently? And then what are our needs going into the future? Like, what's our church's voice? And there's a phenomenal tool, and I was only introduced to it since coming to Grace with Dave and Shane at Clarity House, and they have this kingdom concept tool. So again, Google it, connect with those guys. It's phenomenal. We can put in the show notes. But looking back now, that's essentially what we were doing. Like, what are our church's needs? So, what's the local predicament that we live in? What are our collective potential? What are the things that we're passionate about? Our apostolic esprit is how they put it. And so that speaks to our needs, both currently and then the future. And then I realized once I started to compare those notes about my strengths, my weaknesses, their strengths, weaknesses, needs, that I probably wasn't the best individual, just objectively, right?
Yeah.
Just objectively, I probably wasn't the best person to lead them into the next season. Like, we're realizing that this church needs a capital P pastor. That's the word I always, like a shepherd, I'm an entrepreneurial pastor. So you're always going to get the next new idea. There's always something that we're going to be doing, chasing down, running after, event, program, those sorts of things. In this season of health, I think they needed to rest and be loved in their current reality. And that's not to pull back on evangelism. That's not to do. Yeah. But my bucket is not filled by hospital visits. And I feel like I can say that without feeling any shame. I wasn't always able to say that. Yeah. But that's not my strong suit. Yeah. They needed somebody who was able to love them and rest in that season with them. And that just wasn't me. And so the way I sort of phrased it, which maybe it's helpful for some people, God wants to do a work in the life of that church that you might not be best suited for. But the same is also true, flip side of the same coin. God wants to do a work in you that the current role is not best suited for. And boy, has that been my story. Wow. I had an individual who came up to me. He was part of my congregation, still goes to the church, and he was like, "You know what? I think it'll be good for you to sit under authority for a while." And I'm like, "Wow, dude, I'm going to punch you in the face right now."
Sit under this authority.
That's right. And I remember feeling initially offended by that, but 4 years after, I know what he meant. It wasn't like, "Hey, you haven't sat under authority," and that's what you. It's just like, it was all, I knew I needed a rest, and I didn't know I needed a rest. Yeah. There was identity issues that, as a pastor at 22, there was stuff that I just had not worked through. Just in my own personal life. There are things that you naturally sacrifice as a pastor when you walk into a tragic situation, and you really have to spiritually and emotionally control that room. Yeah. And that had just become my default. And so there's things about me that I have discovered for the first time in the last 4 years that had I not stepped out of that position, I wouldn't be who I am today. Yeah. I think I'm a healthier version. You can ask my wife. I think I'm a healthier version of who I would have been if I stayed. It may still have been beautiful. Sure. But I wouldn't be who I am today. And so I think we have to realize those things. It's hard to say those words. We literally said those words to the church. I don't believe and things were great. It's up and to the right at that time. But I think you need somebody different for this next season. Wow. And that was really, really helpful. Henry Nouwen talks about this sort of progression from solitude to community to ministry. And I don't have time to unpack it. but I'd realized that I'd really forsaken in my own life the solitude part. And this solitude part allows you to discover that and rest in the fact that you're just a beloved child of God. And I don't know if I had truly discovered that. One of the big struggles for me was just, am I okay being a child of God? Because I'd always just been a lead pastor or a Christian leader of some sort. So anyway, sharing a little too much about my story, but that's the process that was really just so helpful to include yourself and your church, bring them together, and then just have an honest conversation.
Yeah. It's great.
Amazing. Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, we went through a similar process, came to different conclusions, and so my process went through a similar soul searching moment, and God said, "No, I want you to chase down this next season here, and to use and leverage the trust that you've built over your years to take us through this next chapter." And that's the cool thing about, we have a thing called savvy follower. That you got to know the right thing to do at the right time in the right way. And two similar experiences, two different outcomes. I think God was deeply in them both. So
and both should be celebrated when they're realized.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us, Stephen. That's
awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate
Thanks. So thanks for joining us. And maybe if your voice gets good marks from people, we'll have you back.
Oh, all right.
People enjoy your voice.
So if I don't get back, people hated it.
Exactly.
Right. Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that was a good conversation with Stephen.
Yeah, amazing.
So let's move on and talk about some practical stuff that happened in the life of our church this week. One thing we'll do from time to time is literally talk about a Sunday. I think this is a good Sunday. This past Sunday is a good Sunday to talk about. So thoughts from the weekend from you?
Yeah, so it was interesting. We had a little, we always try to have a little powwow in between services to just assess how it went and if there's anything we needed to do different. And it was...
For context, we have two per Sunday.
Two per
services,
Sunday, and at three different venues, So the venue I happened to be at, we had we just had a conversation between where it was one of those moments where you kind of felt it in the moment that all the pieces were incredible, but we had a flow issue. And so as we talked about that flow issue, it was kind of, we had this moment of like, I don't think we can or should try to fix it for a second service. We're just going to roll with it. Yeah. But it was kind of like a for the future
teaching moment kind of thing.
Yeah. Here's, and so just to be specific, we had a very vision-y, this was the kickoff of our Awake the Lake series. And so we had a very vision-y kind of message about the future of our church. Then we went into a communion. And then we went into a song that people knew, and then we went into a song that people didn't know that connected to the vision. And so it was one of those moments where when you felt it in the room, it was like people were pumped up at the end of the sermon, and I think would have loved to have responded at the end with to go out with something that they knew instead of learning a new
celebrate
song
or something. Yeah.
And so it was almost like we told the team, or we talked about it in between, of saying, man, if we came out of that sermon with more of bringing that vision-y song in right after as kind of like we're going to sing it over you, and as you learn it, jump in, and then we're going to end with this kind of anthemic.
Even do communion with that.
Yeah, maybe
or something.
Communion within that, or communion even before the sermon, so it doesn't kind of break that flow at the end, and end with a big we're singing and worshiping together with this song that we all know well, and can kind of sing it out. And so it just was one of those. It just felt a little jerky in terms of the flow, and that's one of those goofy little things, but it's important.
It's really important. Yeah. And I think it's important too, to what you said, it's important to talk about these things when they happen. It's also important to discern whether or not you take action. That would have been way too much to take action on in the next 30 minutes. Could have made it worse. Yeah. Because you have volunteers on the stage, you might be stripping confidence and, so you got to weigh that, but always try to use that teaching moment. I think the thing about, for me, curating experiences that's been helpful, over the years is, because it is sometimes difficult to know what's going to happen. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, but to sense what's going to happen in a flow until you experience it, like what you just said. But there is a practice you can do where you do literally, this is what I would do, like sit down and map out, physically draw out the way you think the momentum of the service, or I sometimes call it like energy, or I don't mean like,
new age.
A new age energy. I just mean like energy in the room, spiritual energy. How you think that's going to go. And if it's just a practical look at like, is this song fast or slow? Let's map it here. Let's map this one here. This one goes here. And then the sermon's going to be like supervision-y. So I put that up here. And when something's up here, you can take people one of two ways. You can go up and to the right, and both would be fine, but they need to be intentional. So up and to the right, just celebratory, just like what you're saying. Awesome. You can go the other way. You could take it like introspective. Like, what are you going to do with this vision? I think your way is the right way in that case, but that's just, practical advice is just like, look at your tech sheet or your paper, wherever you're writing down what the service is doing, and really think about what's the point of the experience? What do we want people to do with it at the end? And then how do we get them from coming in distracted, coming in, get them ready, take them on a journey, and do something.
And what's interesting is this whole podcast, we're talking about our journey from a mega church to a more missional multiplication church. And I think things like this, as we talk about this, is like, well, is that just a mega churchy thing to think about? And I don't think it is, because I think even as we're thinking about shifting how our weekends feel through a more disciple-making lens, maybe it has a more conversational tone. Maybe we're introducing more practical tools and that sort of thing. This still fits. We have to think about ahead of time, what kind of experience are we taking people through? Because in the end, we still are gathering with a whole bunch of people in a room, and we as the leaders have to consider how are we moving them through that experience so that at the end it will have maximum impact on their life. And so, again, right now we're talking about music and sermons, but it could be a training tool. It could be how do we take prayer requests? It could, all of those things have an energy to them that needs to be kind of considered in the flow of a service.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Anything else?
Well, the other thing that we worked on this week was, as it relates to our new vision, is we piloted a new experience for the first time. So this is our new launch class that's basically like the primer during this transition season. It's like the primer toward our discipleship roles, the 4 discipleship roles that we're trying to train into our whole church, and kind of this new strategy that we're using, and we're kind of introducing our church to those things. We haven't launched the first class yet. We did a pilot class a couple nights ago with some of our key leaders. We're taking them through kind of a condensed version so that they can experience the content and all that. How do you think it went?
I think it went awesome. I think it went awesome because we learned so much too.
Right.
Sarah, who basically architect of the class, she chose to lead it. I think to probably learn more, and there's just something about getting off the paper. And some things, especially I think in a training situation, you don't know necessarily how it's going to land until you're like in the moment. And we've done things in the past where like classes where we're a big evaluating church for sure. So we're always in that posture, but sometimes it takes a long time.
Yeah.
You go through 2 cycles of a 4-week class before you can take action on changing it, and then you have the time to change it. So this let us see in one night a huge pivot that we needed to make. And then it also got everyone on board. So everyone who had to take action, like on my team, like you're changing graphics, we're changing wording, everyone was like, yes, because we experienced it.
That's right.
So everyone's like, exactly let's do it. Let's make it happen. This is going to be awesome. This is a lot, but we're going to do it, So I think for that, it was a huge win.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just say that I think the big takeaway for us is like, if you can pilot something before you actually roll it out, do it every time because it is so valuable. Even if it's a small crowd, even if it's a tiny, somebody you're running something by, but man, before you launch a thing, if you can pilot that thing, it gives you quick feedback. It lets you see how it feels. I mean, I know like with Sarah, she was able to like dial in on certain questions that worked better than others.
Yep, that was awesome.
And, you know, just man, it was, it keeps you kind of open-handed about the thing. You don't get too married to it, you know, and I think all those things are really good. So, you know, I think the value of piloting something new before you actually roll it out is a really big kind of principle takeaway that we're taking away as we are getting ready to roll a bunch of things out.
Yeah. And as a bonus, if you need like some guidance when you pilot something, I think the easiest rubric or whatever is what was good, what was bad, what was missing, what was confusing. Or you can say what was good, what could have been better, what's stuck.
Yeah.
That's the way we chose.
That's the way we chose.
Just real quick, simple feedback. You know, you're not getting into huge narratives or whatever, but just easy questions.
I think the what stuck thing is an interesting question because it's like then you're kind of getting at, without getting too deep, of like, man, that moment is what somebody took away.
Right.
Like that it was just a throwaway for us, but maybe that's a moment that we need to think a little bit more about because it actually had sticking power.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thanks for joining us again today. You can like and share. Please like and share. If you like this, like it.
Right.
Share it. It would help. It would help us. You can go to dereksanford.com and /blog. Just go to the website and you'll see show notes. You can subscribe to Derek's newsletter where he does some cool content and just see what he's kind of done in the past, and hopefully that'll help you along. So we'd love to also hear from you if you have an email you want us to read and help respond to, or if you have something you think would be helpful for everybody, even to see your response, that'd be cool too. We can keep it anonymous if you want, but you can submit that there on his website as well. So thanks for joining us, and thank you, Derek.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.